Let's jump right into today's explainer, where we're unpacking a really fascinating stretch of text from the opening verses of Surah Al-Ahzab. The core theme we're looking at today? Steadfastness to truth. And this isn't just some abstract, head-in-the-clouds philosophical concept. As we dig into the source text, we're going to see exactly how this idea of being completely steadfast was applied historically across some really distinct, but actually deeply interconnected areas of everyday life.
So to set the stage here, I want you to think about this. What on earth links a tense, ancient negotiation over idols, the nitty-gritty details of family law, and a massive cosmic covenant between the greatest prophets in history? Right? I mean, at first glance, if you're just reading through the text, these sound like completely disjointed textbook topics. But as we'll see, they actually fit together like a giant puzzle to form one brilliant, cohesive story about aligning literally every single aspect of your life, political, personal, spiritual, with the absolute truth.
All right, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the pressure to compromise. 2, reforming family customs. 3, honoring the prophet's family. 4, the universal prophetic covenant. And finally, 5, trust, knowledge, and action. We'll be moving from a very specific historical conflict right up to macro-level spiritual concepts.
Section 1, the pressure to compromise.
Okay, let's picture this historical moment. Before fully embracing Islam, a group led by Abu Sufyan came to Al-Madinah with a pretty massive proposal for the Prophet Muhammad. They basically offered a compromise. They said, hey, we'll guarantee your safety, we'll leave you alone if you just stop speaking out against our specific gods, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manna, and publicly state that these idols have the power of intercession. Now, think about the immense real-world pressure of that moment. If the Prophet had taken that deal, it would have been a fatal leniency when it comes to shirk, associating partners with God. But instead, the text reveals a super strict command: keep your duty to Allah and obey not the disbelievers and the hypocrites. The absolute truth simply could not be compromised just to get some temporary political safety.
Moving on to Section 2, reforming family customs. Now, it's really fascinating how the text shifts gears here. We zoom out from that tense political standoff and look at how being steadfast to the truth also meant tearing down these deeply ingrained, totally irrational habits right inside the home. A crucial example is this practice called az-zahar. In pre-Islamic times, if a husband got really angry, he might just declare to his wife, "You are to me like the back of my mother." Crazy, right? But this was an absolute irrational form of permanent separation. It instantly destroyed the family unit and left the wife in this terrible limbo. The source text just directly dismantles this. It points out the obvious. A man's wife is not his mother. Only the woman who actually gave birth to him is his mother. The text basically says, look, a man doesn't have two hearts in his chest to hold two completely contradictory truths, just like a wife literally cannot simultaneously be a mother.
But the text doesn't just say stop doing that. It provides a very clear, structured path to fix the mess. If a man made this terrible mistake, he couldn't just brush it off like it was nothing. To undo the falsehood of az-zihar and actually reunite the family, the text lays out a specific step-by-step expiation process. First step, he has to free a believing slave. If he can't find or afford one, step 2, fast for 2 consecutive months. And if he physically cannot do that, step 3, feed 60 poor people. I love this because it perfectly illustrates how the truth demands real accountability. You can't just take back false words, you literally have to put in substantial corrective action to repair the damage.
And that brings us to another major reform inside the family: lineage. The text highlights a really stark contrast between two different practices. On one hand, you have orphan sponsorship. This is highly recommended in Islam. You take financial and emotional responsibility for a child, but, and this is key, they keep their true biological surname. On the other hand, we have false adoption. This was a pre-Islamic practice where an adopted son was falsely given the surname of his adoptive father. It entirely overrode his biological lineage and gave him full inheritance rights that actually belonged to biological relatives. The text strictly prohibits this false adoption. It commands that children must be called by their real father's names. It is all about preserving absolute truth in biological lineage, keeping the family cohesive, and preventing total injustice when it comes to inheritance.
Now, changing habits that are this deeply rooted, we're talking about how adoption and divorce were handled for generations, is incredibly hard. People don't like change. The source material actually highlights the psychological why behind the what through the concept of gradualism. Human nature naturally resists sudden, massive shifts. So, by introducing these family laws step by step, gradually, the text ensured that the minds and hearts of the people could actually accept these difficult societal changes and adhere to them better. It's a really profound lesson in how to manage human reform.
Section 3. honoring the prophet's family. So we shift now from those general societal family laws to the very specific, elevated spiritual hierarchy of the prophet's own family. The text establishes this unique, totally unparalleled reverence for the prophet with a pretty striking quote. It says, "The prophet is closer to the believers than themselves, and his wives are as their mothers." Basically, this means that obedience to his guidance takes absolute precedence over your own personal desires and, yep, even over your own family. It's a level of loyalty that is just profound.
And because of that extraordinary proximity to the prophet, his wives were given a highly specialized rank. They were honored with the title Mothers of the Believers. The text actually notes that because of this elevated position and the incredibly heavy responsibility that came with it, they were granted double the reward for their good deeds. But, as with anything, this unique honor came with unique rules. Out of pure respect for their status, they were strictly prohibited from remarrying after the prophet's death. These rules impartially reflected the sheer gravity of their position within the faith.
Section 4. The Universal Prophetic Covenant.
Now the narrative elevates once again. We're zooming way out from the prophet's immediate family to look at his cosmic place among the great historical messengers. The text introduces a concept called the Mithaq Galiz. This translates to a great solemn covenant of loyalty. And guys, this wasn't some everyday agreement made with regular people. This was a massive, overarching covenant exacted by God from the prophets themselves. The whole point of this was to ensure that they would convey the pure, unadulterated message, and crucially, that they would confirm, support, and completely believe in one another.
The verses explicitly single out 5 major figures known as the messengers stout of heart: Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. By dropping these specific heavyweight names, the text really illustrates the grand, unified historical scale of this message. It connects the prophet Muhammad directly to this continuous ancient chain of revelation.
There's also this beautiful linguistic nuance in the source text right here that I want to point out. The verse uses the plural form for prophets, which obviously acknowledges the many different messengers sent across different eras, but it uses a strictly singular word for the covenant. Why is that? Well, because despite the different times, the different places, and the specific laws they all brought, their core message of truth was entirely one and the same. It just brilliantly emphasizes their perfectly unified goal.
Section 5. Trust, Knowledge, and Action.
For our final section, we are going to bring these lofty theological and historical concepts right back down to earth, to practical, everyday application for us as focused learners. A major theme in staying steadfast to the truth is reliance on God, but the text draws a really sharp, absolutely crucial contrast here. It distinguishes between tawakkul and tawakkul. Now, tawakkul is true reliance. It means taking all the necessary practical steps, literally putting in the actual effort, and only then relying on God for the outcome. On the flip side, tawakkul is basically just laziness and incapacity. It's doing absolutely nothing and expecting everything to just magically work out. The text commands active steadfastness, definitely not passive inaction. To really anchor this idea, the source material uses a super relatable analogy about knowledge and wisdom. It states that knowledge without action is entirely valueless. Imagine a father advising his son about the physical harms of smoking. The son might completely understand the biology, he might memorize all the statistics, and fully agree with his dad. That is knowledge. But, come on, that knowledge is completely useless unless the son physically takes the action of quitting. Just recognizing the truth is never enough. It literally has to be paired with active physical obedience.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this entire explainer. From rejecting political compromise to reforming family habits to honoring ancient covenants, the core message is that truth requires movement. So the question I want to leave you with today is this: are you just gathering knowledge from explainers like this one, or are you actively pairing that knowledge with steadfast action in your own everyday life? Thanks so much for joining me.